Former President Trump says that as president, he should have a say in the Fed's decisions on interest rates. We look into it today, coming up on Business Matters. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining me here today. I'm your host, Don Ma. Now, before we get into today's news, we have an important announcement to make. So starting next week, I'll be hosting another show, and I'm going to take a short break from this show, Business Matters, but we will be back in a different format and soon, so you can look forward to that. But in the meantime, you can still see me from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on the NTD News Today show. Okay, let's get into it. Positive end to the week on Wall Street today. All three indexes ending in the green. Stocks clawing back most of their losses after Monday's sell-off. So S&P up about 50% here. NASDAQ also around 50%. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average also up around 50 points. But despite the recovery in stocks, it appears that the early week volatility did in fact spook investors. London Stock Exchange data showing substantial amounts of money funneled into money market funds in the 7 days to August 7th. These types of funds are seen as liquid safe havens where investors run to if they're expecting a potential downturn. But retail investors were buyers during much of the recent roller coaster in U.S. stock markets. They took advantage of a sharp fall in popular tech stocks, according to various research reports. And as I mentioned in the beginning, former President Trump says that as president, he should have a say in the Fed's interest rate decisions, a policy that impacts the world economy. Here are the details.
The president should have at least say in there.
Former President Trump said at a press conference Thursday that he wants to be able to influence Federal Reserve interest rate decisions as president.
I made a lot of money. I was very successful, and I think I have a better instinct than, in many cases, people that would be on the Federal Reserve or the chairman.
The Federal Reserve controls America's money supply. Its policies impact the entire world. Bad decisions can lead to large-scale economic downturns. Fed Chair Jerome Powell says the Fed should be free of political influence.
The absence of direct political control over our decisions allows us to take these necessary measures without considering short-term political factors.
Powell says he aims to make the best long-term decisions, which may not be popular in the short term.
We want the Federal Reserve to be focused on true underlying economic principles and factors, and not focused on what a given political party might want.
Economist Sean Dubervac agrees. The Federal Reserve can temporarily juice up the economy by lowering rates. This makes the president look good, but it could also lead to inflation in the long term. Back in 2018, Trump criticized the Fed for raising interest rates. His comments Thursday continued that criticism.
He's right to question them. He's right to sort of ask, maybe we should be thinking about putting more guardrails, more accountability on the Fed because its decisions have such a big impact.
Economist Paul Mueller agrees the Fed should be independent, but he also says the Fed may have too little accountability.
Right now, there's a whole game that lots of economists and people on Wall Street are always watching. What's the Fed going to do? Are they going to cut rates in September? Are they going to cut rates in November?
Mueller says while this may seem fun, it's not great and creates volatility. He suggests that Congress create clear rules for the Fed's operation.
People don't necessarily agree on exactly what those rules would be, but having some kind of rule, some kind of clear guidance that everybody knows about, that is very predictable, stable.
The Fed's next interest rate decision will be announced between September 17th and 18th at the next meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee.
And news just out, Stellantis is laying off almost 2,500 factory workers from an assembly plant outside of Detroit. So the automaker is ending production of the Ram 1500 Classic truck, and the layoffs will be effective as early as October 8th, the company said. Joining me now to discuss is automotive expert Lauren Fix at Car Coach Reports. Lauren, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
All right, so what's happening here at Stellantis? Does that surprise you?
Well, it's kind of sad because the Ram Classic is a big selling truck, but apparently they feel they need to make some changes. There's a lot of things going on at Stellantis. I think because they're now a European-owned company, that they don't understand the U.S. marketplace. Trucks are a mainstay for the Ram brand, and not having the classic truck, which is an entry-level vehicle, I think is going to be a problem, and it may affect their bottom line. And a lot of different manufacturers are struggling.
What do you think about this ending the production on the Ram 1500? Is it because of competition? Could it be because of the Cybertruck? Other trucks like Rivian? I mean, what do you think it's behind this?
Well, it's not all Ram 1500s, which are half-ton trucks. It's just the classic, which is the entry level. So I think one of the things that people need to understand is the truck business is huge, and still number one for the last over 40 years is Ford Motor Company with their F-Series Super Duty. Now, Ram has a lot of competition in their half-ton truck market, and that includes the Silverado. You've got the Titan XD, and then, of course, you've got the electric vehicles, the Cybertruck, which right now sales are horrible. If you want to buy a Cybertruck, you can literally get online today and get one in the next couple of days because there's no more a backlog, which tells you that production numbers that they produced more than they need, which is seeming to be the situation with not just Tesla, but with Rivian, but we're also seeing that with Nissan. Their sales are way down right now. In the last quarter, they had a 99% profit loss, which means they only made 1%. And that's a big sign that a lot of these car companies need to start understanding that consumers want gasoline powered, they want hybrid, and there is a mix for electric. It doesn't mean that one or the other should go away, but understanding that mix properly and producing cars that consumers want is super critical. And if you don't, which is what all the manufacturers are learning, that they're now adjusting their mix of electric vehicles and gas, because even though the federal government is mandating a lot of this, that may change in November, that we don't know. This is a huge factor, and we're seeing a lot of pullback from every single brand.
And let me focus a little bit longer on this Cybertruck because I've actually seen more and more of those on roads, on streets. What are your thoughts on it?
I have driven one. A friend of mine bought one, and I asked him, I said, hey, what do you think? He says, well, first off, the insurance is $7,500 for 6 months. That's $15,000 a year in just insurance because it's an electric vehicle and because it's so heavy. And then he ran over something when one of his construction sites and got a flat tire, and the tire replacement was over $1,000 for one tire. So that's going to cause a lot of consumers to pull back on buying vehicles that are gigantic, like the Hummer EV, like the Cybertruck. Even though they're available and they're sort of a cute little toy, they're great if you lease them and you walk away from them after 2 or 3 years. But owning one, I think you're going to have a problem reselling it down the road, as every single car manufacturer is saying electric vehicles on the secondary market, in other words, used vehicles, there's a problem and they're taking a huge loss.
All right, also happening today, Marissa West leaving GM after 8 months as North American president. Your thoughts on that?
That was a huge shocker. Now, Marissa West has been with General Motors for over 10 years. Now, she was a North American president, huge position. And she'd been doing all kinds of other jobs along the way. So she didn't just come from some other brand. But not only being there 8 months, either they were disenchanted with their decision or something else happened or she had a better offer elsewhere. But leaving after 8 months is a huge statement. Either it's an impact that you're going to see in General Motors and their bottom line, even though last quarter they did pretty good. I would like to see some more details on that one. I'm sure we'll get that over the weekend.
All right, Lauren, thank you very much for your time today. That's all the time we have.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Could human beings depend on computers for companionship? That's a concern raised by OpenAI. A new report suggests that the human-sounding voice on ChatGPT is so realistic that some people may develop relationships with the tool. ChatGPT's advanced voice mode responds in real time, makes adjustments when interrupted, and can determine a person's emotional state just by their voice tone. Officials at OpenAI say they've observed people, quote, expressing shared bonds with ChatGPT. All right, let's take a break here. Coming up after, the Boeing Starliner astronauts still out in space with no return date. A possible return could also happen on a SpaceX vehicle. And lawmakers from 6 countries say Beijing is pressuring them not to attend a conference in Taiwan. We have the details on that after the break. Welcome back. Lawmakers from at least 6 countries said Chinese agents pressure them not to attend a China-focused conference in Taiwan. The conference organizers are now calling the CCP's actions deplorable. NTD Sean Marshall has more.
An international group of lawmakers is criticizing the Chinese Communist Party after CCP representatives tried to stop legislators from attending a pro-democracy conference in Taiwan. Taiwan's Inter-Parliamentary Alliance, or IPAC, says the People's Republic of China used coercive measures to intimidate the delegates of at least 6 countries.
I'm not saying we have any intention to even think about toppling China, but when China pursues intentions to topple our democratic order, we fight back.
The IPAC is a group of hundreds of lawmakers from 35 countries working to counter the CCP's actions to subvert international order and democratic principles.
This regular conference that happens about democracy in Taiwan and the attempts by the CCP really to bully governments and individual representatives from going to this.
Politicians in Bolivia, Colombia, Slovakia, North Macedonia, Bosnia, and one Asian country that declined to be named said they were getting texts, calls, and urgent requests for meetings that would conflict with their plans to travel to Taipei.
And we heard reports from a number of countries, from particularly in Latin America and smaller European countries, about just a variety of tactics, everything from malware to very strong, off-the-record, threatening types of language.
They had over 50 delegates of the conference sign a statement condemning the actions.
Actually, it's a pretty shocking thing to be thinking that you might be a public servant or an academic in a foreign country, but the CCP knows who you are and is tracking you and your families.
The condemnation statement ends with, "We stand resolutely with our colleagues against the PRC's deplorable intimidation and call upon our governments to spare no effort in protecting the freedoms of their parliamentarians, upon which the health of our democracies depend." Sean Marshall, NTD News.
And foreign airlines are pulling services or opting not to restart flights to China after the pandemic. It's led by Western carriers such as British Airways and Australia's Qantas Airways. Foreign carriers operated only 60% of pre-pandemic flights, indicating a retreat from China. Foreign rivals are deterred by weak China travel demand and rising costs and extended flight times. And India may be the next big growth bet as China's economy lags. Packaged goods giants like PepsiCo and others looking to fill the growth vacuum left by an uneven recovery in China. The chief economist at Annex Wealth Management says that, quote, the last decade had companies focused on selling into China. The next decade is about selling into India. And earlier, I spoke to Santosh Rao. He's the head of research at Manhattan Venture Partners for further insight. I want your thoughts on this. In what way has India become more attractive compared to China?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Well, I think India is a great market, and this has been telegraphed very well. You know, you have this political winds blowing between US and China with many other countries, the European Union. So there's a lot of friction going on in terms of flow of goods. I think India, Vietnam, and all the other countries are great places to get out of China and into these places. And these are very consumer oriented. India is a growing middle class. It's tipped to be the fifth largest economy in a few years. So it's really growing fast and tipped to be, in fact, it's already the fifth, but it's going to be the third largest economy pretty soon, the way it's growing. It's a rising middle class and everybody wants branded goods. There is an affinity to branded goods. So all these things are playing right into the demand in India, a strong demand in India. And so it's totally understandable. The IT boom in India, the pharmaceutical boom in India, and all that has really solidified the demand side of the equation in India. And that's why you're seeing that. They're moving out and there is no friction. It's a democratic country. You can go in and out, and they have really refined the tax laws. So it's very simple now. So I think they've made it very easy for multinationals to enter India and do business there. And that's why you're seeing that break away from China.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, China previously has always been considered a place of growth, for investors. So what happened here?
Well, China had a lot of issues. First of all, the COVID shutdown slowed everything down. And then the demand side, the consumer demand has slowed down as well. So the economy is sputtering, so to speak, on a relative basis. And India is growing at an 8% clip, which is the largest, the fastest clip in the whole world. The GDP of India is expected to be 8%, growing at 8%. So that's not a break. It doesn't need rocket science to realize that that's where you want to be. And that's what's happening. China is slowing down, plus it has all these political cross currents, plus it has all these regulatory roadblocks. And India is free, it's growing, rising middle class, a young crowd that loves Western goods, Western packaged items, and they've made it very seamless. The transportation, the infrastructure is improving. So all those things are playing right into this, and the Indian government is focused on that.
Let's touch a little bit on manufacturing. So China has a huge manufacturing capacity. And how is India supposed to compete with that?
Well, let me take a step back. India is great, it's growing, but it's still a very small part when it comes to China. And it's not easy ripping and replacing, taking out manufacturing from China to India or Vietnam or anywhere else. China is huge, and it's been doing that for the last 10, 20 years. So it's built a manufacturing base. It essentially was the factory of the world. So it's not going to be easy taking everything out overnight. But manufacturing is growing in other countries as well now. Like Tesla is setting up a new plant. Apple is making iPhone 15s, and it'll probably make 16s in India. So all the high-end technology stuff is now being built in India. There's a seashore, so it's coming in and out of India is very easy. In the past, the Indian government was its biggest hurdle. There were too much red tapeism, kind of a socialist kind of background, breaking out of that. And under the new prime minister, or rather, he's now almost 10 years, more than 10 years, he's just elected for the third term. He has focused on making it business friendly, making it very easy for others to come in, because India needs to employ people. I think that's their biggest thing. They need jobs. In the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see a big chunk of a big slice out of China coming into India. But at this stage, China still has a dominant role. It's huge. It has an incumbency role, so to speak. So it'll take some time.
That's all the questions I have for you today, Santosh. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
What was expected to be a week-long mission for 2 Boeing Starliner astronauts back in the beginning of June has turned into a stay in space of more than 60 days. There's now talk of their return not even happening until 2025. And this is as testing continues to find the root cause of issues Starliner had on the way to the International Space Station. The spacecraft suffered helium leaks and propulsion problems on the first leg of its flight. NASA announced Wednesday that it's exploring several contingency plans, one of which would keep Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams on the ISS for another 6 months, and possibly a return could happen on a SpaceX vehicle. As of now, though, there's no clear date set for a return to Earth. And I discussed this with Brandon Weichert. He's a space expert and the author of the book Winning Space. Brandon, thank you very much for your time today. Just to start off, just give us your general thoughts overall on this situation where the astronauts are still up there.
Well, thanks for having me. The last time I was on with you, I said that this is a big, important move for Boeing, getting astronauts on their new Starliner, and that it was really going to prove whether or not Boeing is still a competitive aeronautical company or aerospace firm. And unfortunately, I think that we're now seeing even their space kind of side of the business is suffering in the same way that their sort of civilian airliner side is suffering. And now we've got a handful of astronauts who are basically stuck up in space until whenever, for coming back to Earth. We don't know what their return date is because Boeing doesn't feel comfortable with their Starliner, and certainly the government doesn't either to use that to come back home.
So are you actually labeling the situation that they are stuck?
Yeah, they're stuck up there until we can get a return vehicle. And I'm hearing that, NASA is approaching SpaceX now with using the Dragon, the SpaceX Dragon capsule. And so that would be, if it happens, it'd be great for the astronauts to get home sometime soon. But obviously, that would be a huge blow for the company of Boeing and all of the issues they've had, generally speaking. This would just be another blight. So they better get their act together if they want to remain a competitive firm.
So if you had to guess here, how long would you estimate that the astronauts will be up there at the ISS?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to note that, the astronauts are safe. There's nothing, I mean, they're just out in space now for, a protracted period of time. So in terms of a safety issue, unless that changes, there's going to be a lot of time. Remember, Boeing has a lot of leverage. Boeing has a lot of influence over the government. Also, the government does not want to rely exclusively on SpaceX. That has been the case since 2010. They're always looking for alternatives. And so they are going to use SpaceX as a true last resort. And so as long as those astronauts are well fed and they're healthy, relatively speaking, unfortunately, those guys are probably going to stay up there indefinitely until Boeing says we can get them home. And right now, nobody's saying Boeing can get them home. Neither Boeing is saying that, nor the U.S. government. So this is really an odd, very unfortunate position to be in.
Okay, can you just reiterate for us that they have enough food and water and air up there?
Well, look, they have a certain amount. And like I said, once that situation changes, that's when suddenly you're going to see, rapid mission changes happening. But until NASA feels like it's no longer conducive for the health of the astronauts to remain up there, they're going to remain up there. I don't know what their fuel and what their food situation and whatnot looks like, but I do know that NASA's not going to leave them up there if they feel they can't keep these guys alive. And so it's really unfortunate if you're an astronaut up there because you weren't planning to be up there this long.
Okay, can you lay out for us what are some of the potential outcomes in terms of their return? Are they going to use SpaceX?
I think that's probably what's going to happen. I think that is the likeliest scenario, but it'll be through gritted teeth because I can assure you, as much as Boeing doesn't want this to happen for obvious reasons, the U.S. government doesn't really want to have to yet again give SpaceX positive headlines, and that's largely political. They don't like Elon Musk, the current administration, and they also just don't like the idea of relying on him because he's not one of the acceptable contractors like Boeing is. But yet again, SpaceX being a startup with a really unique way of doing business, innovative, they're showing the world that this is the company America should be using to win the next space race, not Boeing.
All right, Brandon, great insight today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, all the stories we have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. Now, before we go, I'll just mention this again. Starting next week, I'll be hosting another show, and I'm going to take a short break from this show, Business Matters, but we will be back, and we'll be back soon in a different format. You can look forward to that. In the meantime, you can see me from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on the NTD News Today show. And as I always say, business matters. Goodbye.